And for those of you who listen to the recording, we're going to start now. So I'll read the main idea again real quick. So we can reciprocate God's faithfulness with our thoughts and actions, right? And so there's kind of three ways we're going to look at this. Because the way Malachi is laid out, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. So there's the same kind of topics kind of spread throughout the book or the letter, if you want to look at that. So that's why this one's not really a clean cut chapter 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. Because there's the ideas kind of flow through back and forth. So the first thing is that we can show love because God showed us love. We can show love because God showed us love. And so that's the opening sentence. I have loved you. And he's declaring this to his people. Look, I have loved you. I have taken care of you. I have done all these things. I have put up with your nonsense, essentially. Because when you look back and read the Old Testament, you're like, what are you guys doing? And then you kind of look in the mirror and go, what am I doing? Right, as well sometimes. And so, but the people's response, though, it's not of happiness or admiration. Like, oh, that's so nice. I love you too. It's, well, how have you loved us? Are you sure, God? Because it doesn't seem very loving. Right, because they're being kind of very skeptical. Like, why would you just send us in an exile to a faraway land for decades, and now you're coming back and saying you love me? Right? Again, this kind of this tension of the story that we have here. And so God's purpose in Malachi is that he is making the riches of his glory known among the restored community of Israel by demonstrating the sovereignty of his electing love. But again, Israel is the smallest nation. They're still kind of one of the smallest nations even today. They're not the most powerful. If God was probably wanting to enact a takeover, he could have just picked the Egyptians or the Assyrians and just went with them. And like, you guys have a big army and money and stuff, so we can just roll in world domination. But God said, no, I'm going to pick you, Israel, because I'm faithful to you, because you're my people, and we're going to do it this way. Because when you look at this, when you look at Israel's behavior in Israel, I'm using Israel as both the kingdoms, because I think by this time they're kind of recombined, Israel and Judah. So we're just kind of using the shorthand for Israel. They deserve nothing from God. And they potentially could wind up in the same state as Edom for their wickedness, were it not for God's changeless and sovereign love. Right? Because his love is a love that cannot fail. And we'll read Malachi 3:6 here in a second. But his love is a love that cannot fail because it's from God. And so Malachi 3:6 and 7 says, because I, the Lord, have not changed, you descendants of Jacob have not been destroyed. Since the days of your ancestors you have turned from my statutes, you have not kept them. Listen, this just echoes the same thing in Zechariah and Haggai and a few other ones. Return to me, and I will return to you. Right? Come back to me, and I will come back to you. Now, again, God has already come back to them because he's allowing them to come back to the land. So we know he's already doing that. And so they ask, how can we return? Right? Because sometimes that's, well, why do you still want to love me if I'm so bad? If I just don't want to keep being willfully disobedient, why do you still love me? It's because of the covenant that he makes. Because God loves his people. All right, even though he exiled his people or his wife, because that's an important key through the whole thing, is this basically through the entire book of the entire Bible is this idea of a marriage. God married Israel. Essentially, Israel is his wife. And so, again, for us, thinking about it, it may seem an odd way of showing it that he kicked her out of the house, essentially, but he does not divorce her. Even though God, listen, because if you look at kind of the definition of biblical divorce, in a sense, adultery or infidelity is number one on the list of like reasons you can actually like legit get a divorce. Because Judah and Israel at the time, they were going after other gods like Baal, Asherah, and Molech, and whatever other ones came into their picture at the time. But listen, God shows his love and his faithfulness to his people. And so if we go to Malachi 2:14 and you ask, he says, and you ask why? Because even though the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, you have acted treacherously against her. She was your marriage partner and your wife by covenant, right? So he's kind of playing on this like, look, you treated your earthly wife badly, and so you kind of think this is the same thing. But God is saying, look, you're more important, because God hates divorce. And he would prefer not to have people get divorced. He basically would have preferred not to have this idea invented. But he knows because people are going to do things, he has to kind of leave a little bit of room for them to be people. Right? Because a marriage between a man and a woman is reflective of the covenant between God and his people. And so Paul explains this further in Ephesians 5, at the end of chapter 5, Ephesians 5, verses 22 through 23, and I'll read the last verse in a minute. But basically it says, Christ is the bridegroom and the church is the bride. Husbands are the head of the house and are to act Christ-like in their love for their wives. They are to protect and keep their wives, right? The church submits to Christ as wives submit to the husband. And so this works in a perfect world because Christ is the perfect leader and he has a perfect love for his bride. For us humans, it's a little harder because we're not perfect. And so this relationship requires trust and patience and love and grace. And so Paul, though, summing up Ephesians 5, that whole thing, he says, to sum up, each one of you is to love his wife as himself, and the wife is to respect her husband. Because we as husbands are supposed to submit to Christ first, and it falls through. Like it's a sort of chain of command if you want to look at it that way. And so here's our application for this part. It's very simple. This is Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, right? Love God with all your heart, all your soul, and your strength. So I'll say it like this. All you have to do is love God with all your heart, all your strength, and all your soul. That's all. That's all I'm asking. Not a big deal, right? Ha! Because every time, I think I've said it before, every time somebody tells me all you have to do is, I end up in some precarious situation doing who knows what, or it takes 15 times longer than what they thought it would. But here's what's something you can do this week, right? So this week, identify one area where you're giving God your leftovers. Leftover time, leftover energy, leftover attention. And then what would it look like if you gave him your first and your best in that area? Because that's really what happened with Cain and Abel, right? You go to Genesis chapter 4, we move into Cain and Abel, that's what was happening. Cain was giving him like the kind of the scruffy stuff, the leftover stuff that he didn't want to have or whatever. I'll give this. And the priests were doing the same thing. The priests ended up doing the same thing, like, oh, here's my 90% and I'll give you the pennies because I don't want to count them. So hopefully it's right, you know. So think about that, right? Think about, are you giving God the first and your best of you, or are you giving him the leftovers? Because in the morning, and this is kind of easier way, and again, I don't have a prescribed time necessarily to pray or whatever, because it's kind of whatever works for you. But are you fully paying attention and awake when you're praying and doing these things? Or are you sort of like, oh yeah, I forgot to pray today, so let me do it real quick. Now look, that's better than nothing. Right? I'm going to say that. Because part of it is just building the habit. So I don't want to discourage anybody. It's like, well, if I can't do that, I'm not going to do any of it. Because I know that's me.
Keep doing it.
Right? So keep doing that. Totally fine. But if you sort of plan it out, make a little shift. Like, hey, let me pray right now while I'm thinking about it. Or let me pray in the morning while I'm more awake or whatever it is. Right? See if it changes the responses you get maybe from God, right? So again, I'm not saying these things to pick at you guys or anything like that. Again, praying for 5 seconds is better than praying not at all.
Amen.
So I want to, because sometimes that's all you need anyway, right? Because this takes effort. So this isn't an all or thing because we need to learn, just like anything else, we need to train for this type of stuff to get to that level. So little practices, little 1% improvement every day. Right, that's all it takes. Just small things to do, right? That's kind of the thing. But you need to focus on God. That's the main part. Focus on God. Focus all your efforts on God. And then once we do that, because we're kind of doing it automatically, the second part of this is that we can show obedience through our sacrifice. Right? We can show God our obedience through our sacrifice. And this kind of goes a little bit of like the first and best fruits and the leftovers thing. Because God moves on to the priests and he starts kind of giving them the what for. Because the priests are responsible for keeping the people on the straight and narrow. Because they're responsible, for leading the people in the proper worship of God. And overall, Again, he doesn't give out names or anything like that, but overall, it seems like they were generally poor leaders. And so he's calling them out because they were bringing subpar tithes and offerings. Again, it's, even the word tithe, in especially in New Testament parlance, what does tithe mean? It's 10%. So does that mean they get 10% of the gross or 10% of the net? Because people want to get all their money and things like that. So it's important to make sure you're doing the right thing. That's the big thing. You're doing the right thing. So this is what Malachi 1:7 says and 8. By presenting defiled food on my altar, how have we defiled you, you ask? When you say the Lord's table is contemptible. When you present a blind animal for sacrifice, is it not wrong? When you present a lame or sick animal, is it not wrong? Bring it to your governor. Would he be pleased with you and show your favor? Ask the army, the Lord of armies. So they were giving food offerings. So if you buy a loaf, because one of the things with the showbread or the loaves, if you buy your loaf with the wheat, if you buy it or bake it in this case, and you forget, you got to take it to the church, and it's like been sitting around all week, it might be a little moldy, but it's just nobody's going to eat it. So it's okay to give God moldy bread. Right? It's okay to give God the blind animal, because I can't use it because it's going to keep bumping into the stockyard fence. Or he'll get eaten by a wolf because you can't see him coming. So I'll just put him out of his misery. They can sacrifice it and everybody's a win-win. But there were rules for what the offerings were supposed to be like. They're supposed to be the best, the unblemished animals, the perfect animals. And so we see this coming and God saying, look, you guys are falling down on the job, whether they have to turn away that animal, say, look, you need to bring something back better, or raise their own animals or whatever it is. Like he's saying, look, priests, you're responsible. And Malachi 3:8. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Malachi 3:8 says, will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. How do we rob you, that you ask? And say, by not making the payments of the tenth and the contributions. So I actually saw a picture, funny enough, this week. I've seen it a few times, but it came up on my feed again this week. Somewhere in a church somewhere in America, supposedly, there is a board somewhere in the hallway of this church that says, it quotes this verse. It says, will a man rob God? And they put everybody's name who doesn't tithe, either the 10% or whatever, up on the hallway for everybody to see. Wow. I'm glad everybody's shaking their head no, because that'll kick people out of church really quick. That'll have people leave. We will not be ever doing that, just in case. In case everybody wanted to do that, we're not doing that. Because really, he's talking about the priest doing this. And so sacrifice is what we're talking about. So if you're down to your last dollar and you get 50 cents, that's your 50%. That's a 50% higher tithe than somebody who has $100 and gives $1. Right? I don't see tithe. I don't see who does it. I don't care. You guys are adults. You guys, it's between you and God, right? So don't worry about ever trying to be embarrassed. Because if you can't, you can't. God understands. But again, part of that would be to stretch yourself a little bit as well. Right? Because we do need to make a little bit of a sacrifice as well. I will say that, though. It's important. Because the bottom line is, though, that these people have dishonored God, and they were dishonoring their covenant with God. Because remember, the covenant is defined by loyalty to a person. So would you deprive your spouse of money or anything like that? Or would you want your spouse to have the best stuff? Hopefully you want them to have the best stuff. And the best may be relative to whatever you can afford or whatever you can obtain at the time, whatever. But look, this is the best I got. And I'm giving it to you. And so we do this and we understand. So the priests, though, from their standpoint, they probably thought they were mostly meeting their contractual obligations. Because we're offering an animal. We're giving you bread. We're giving you this, right? I'm doing it. And again, yeah, I get it. But, are you doing it the last minute? Are you doing things to keep track of? Or are you just like, oh, yeah, I forgot. Here you go. I picked up this lamb on the side of the road because nobody wanted it. Because when Jesus was sent to fulfill his mission as a sacrificial lamb, he was a sacrifice worthy of God. Right? Because he is God incarnate. He is God in the flesh. And this was a sacrifice that was pleasing to the Father. And so here's the application for this part is you need to ensure that your sacrifice is meaningful to you and to God or for God as well. But again, it is about stretching yourself a little bit. So yeah, you may need to be a little uncomfortable. Again, even with praying, because if you had to sacrifice some time of doing this or praying or reading the Bible or whatever, right, then you should probably do that, because this is going to pay more dividends in most cases. Now, I'm not saying like I can't go to work because the pastor said I got to pray. Don't do that, right? But you can pray. You can get up 5 minutes early before you have to go to work to pray, or something. Work out your schedule that way. Right? Because I've learned early on, after a while, that certain things I say, like, oh, that doesn't make total sense, and I'm going to say that the pastor said. Like, whoa. But you want to make sure that the sacrifice is worthy and meaningful, right? What's the biggest thing you can give? Your life. The biggest thing, the most important thing you can give is your life, and that's what is asked. You give your life to God. That's why we read Psalm 25:1. Right? God does not want your mechanical obedience. Right, just showing up to church out of guilt, giving more money to stay off the list. I'm going to tithe the whole lot because I don't want to be on the list. That's horrible. That goes against being a cheerful giver. That means you just don't want to be on the bad boy or bad girl list. That's it. Right? He wants your heart. And so when your heart is right, your actions will flow from love and not duty. And then whatever it is, money, time, whatever it is, becomes not an object because I'm doing this for God. And so, again, as long as you're being taken care of and make sure you can eat and do those things, because I want to make sure we do that too. God is not necessarily asking you to starve yourself to give money to somebody and wherever, but make sure there's a balance and you have a good heart about it. Okay, so Paul, this goes all the way to the New Testament. Right? Paul, in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, he says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, in the view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God." Paul tells the Romans right there. This is biblical. He wants your heart. He wants your life. He wants you. And everything else comes out of that because he has you. And then going to Galatians chapter 2, verse 20 says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." The last line sounds like the very first point. Love God because he loved you. And so what does that mean? So that means Monday morning commute becomes worship. Your patience with difficult coworkers or neighbors or people at the store or wherever, it becomes a form of worship. Your choices when no one is watching or holding your hand or whatever it is, all become worship. Because now you're in Christ. You are now a new creation, and so you are made differently. So everything you do becomes, how does this glorify God? Because that is the chief end of man. Or if you look at the Westminster Catechism and some other ones, it's the same thing. What is the purpose of mankind? The chief end is to glorify God. We are here to do that. And so people see, this is what God has done through my life with me. Even though I'm a knucklehead. Even though I'm no better than anybody else anybody in this Bible. Because we're all human. But God is doing great things through me and you and you and you and you and all of us. And collectively as a church, he does great things so he can be glorified in the nations. Beyond the borders of Israel is what he says at the beginning of Malachi. So people know who he is and what he has done. Now, does this happen overnight? Probably not. Carolyn's like, definitely not. She's shaking her head. She's like, I don't know about you, Darren, but no. So the last point of this is that we show patience by waiting for God. So the first five verses of chapter 3 and in all of chapter 4 point the people to the coming Messiah in the last day. Right? They say, look, this is what it's all about. Don't worry, it'll happen at some point. Again, from our reckoning at the end of Malachi to that blank page, this page, it says the New Testament is 400 years before Jesus starts to show up. So 430 years, which is the same time of Egypt was enslaved Israel was enslaved in Egypt, by the way. And so what does Malachi say in verses 1 through 3? See, I am going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me. Then the Lord you seek will suddenly come to his temple, the messenger of the covenant you delight in. See, he is coming. We'll get to that in a second, but you guys can write it down if you want. But the question is, but who can endure the day of his coming, and who will be able to stand when he appears? This is in the rest of the couple verses in chapter 3. For he will be like a refiner's fire and like a launderer's bleach. He will be like a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver. Then they will present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. Right? And who did Jesus focus on a lot? When he got here, he talked to the Pharisees a lot because they were kind of descendants of Levi, or at least in that same priesthood realm. And so Jesus is coming at this point in history. He's coming them. God is telling them that he will return at some point. And so it's important that they keep worshiping God and looking to him for the rest of their lives, because you don't know when it's going to happen, but you need to be prepared. Because the most important thing is that they remember that their loyalty is to God and their covenant. Right? That's the most important thing. That's why we do what we do, because we're in a covenant. And this is important because we see that God is loyal to his people. He doesn't have to be, but he is. Because really he does have to be, because it's his character anyway, honestly. Even though he maybe shouldn't by our accounts. And so the new covenant is secured by Jesus' sacrifice, right? When at the Last Supper, he says, this is the new covenant made in my blood. And so with that sacrifice, though, he widens the net of people that are included in the term God's people. Right? All of a sudden, we are now included. And so Galatians 3:29 says, and if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. Because what Paul is telling everybody is, look, you don't have to follow the law. Because if you're you are there, you are under the umbrella, and you are grafted on to the plant that is Abraham, that is God. You are there already. You are now heirs according to this promise. You are included, whether you are a Jew or what they call Gentile, so everybody else. Yeah. Whether you're Roman, Greek, Turkish, what I'll use our terms, Arabic, German, South, Ecuadorian, whatever. If you accept Christ, you are now in Christ. You are a Christian. And so all of those other things go away in a sense, and you are just born to the tree. But listen, God is warning and reminding them. He's reminding the people of what happened in the past. And even in the New Testament, there's also warnings, especially in Hebrews, about doing the same thing. And it's not because you can lose your salvation, but it's a reminder of what your covenant is. And more importantly, who the covenant is with. It is about your loyalty to God. Right? But we know, unfortunately, that waiting is not Judah and Israel's strong suit. Good thing we know how to wait really well, right? We're not impatient at all. We didn't invent a service that brings you packages and things in 2 days or less. Because we don't want to wait for Christmas or anything else. Right? But Israel and Judah both went looking for other gods because they didn't think Yahweh was around or that he was capable of fulfilling their needs. All you got to do is read Exodus. When Moses went to the mountain to talk to God for 40 days and he was gone, and they're like, well, what are we doing? I don't know. Let's make a god. Give me all your jewelry. We'll melt it down and make a big calf. Everybody want to do that? We can just, ladies, give me all your jewelry. We'll melt it down. We'll make a big bowl and we'll dance around it and have a party. They couldn't even wait 40 days. And Moses was coming back like that next night because he came down to the party. Right? I mean, they didn't want to wait. So what helps us, though? So here's the application part. What helps us waiting is we need to focus on God as much as possible. So what are the modern day idols calling for your attention in your worship? Oh, shoot. Everything, right? Yeah. And things are engineered to get your attention. Things are engineered to make you watch whatever it is, or make you want to read it, or make you want to listen to it, or whatever it is, or pay attention to the doom cycle of the news. And like I think I told us before, but we moved to El Paso several years. We got stationed there, and we've been there a day or two, literally, and we had the news on. And it's like a drunk driver did this, and then a couple minutes later, drunk driver did this, and we weren't really paying attention. We're like, man, there's a lot of drunk drivers. Yeah, let's around an army post, so it makes sense. Love the army guys. But anyway, the clock kept getting reset for the days of stupid things that happened. But we're like, man, that's a lot of stuff that goes on here. And then we realize, like, it's the same story every 5 seconds.
That's it.
And you're like, oh, okay. So now it's not so bad. It's only one guy doing this thing, and they just keep saying it because there's not a lot going on, right? But that's where you get sucked into this cycle of like, how bad is this? How bad is what's going on? Because if we focus on those things, we take our focus away from God. Because then you can say, God, what are you doing about all these things? Or what are you doing with these things? Because all this stuff, your phone, your computer, the TV, all this stuff isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, you can find bad things on there, for sure. But when they replace your sense of hope or identity, right, they become idols. Like, if they become your source of truth or people, because now everybody has a platform, you can say anything you want, basically. And if you don't know any better, you can totally believe it. Like, well, that sounds stupid, but maybe it's true. I don't know. But what you need to do, what we can do in the morning is just, for instance, each morning we remind ourselves that God is faithful and God is here and God is enough. Right? And if we kind of put those glasses on, it helps us sort of filter things out and say, okay, God will take care of this. God will take care of that. These aren't my responsibilities. And so waiting doesn't mean just sitting around, though, either. Right? Because there's a lot of work to be done. Because here in the books, the 12 prophets, they had to come back and build the temple. They had to come back and build the church. There's work for them to be done. And so things with us. There's a gospel to be spread. There's good news to be told to the world about Jesus Christ. And that's our job. That's what we do while we're waiting. We're waiting for Jesus to come back. We want to get more people on the train. Because it's not our job to say you can come on and you can't. We just tell everybody who it is, and the Holy Spirit says, yeah, you're in, you're here, you're here. Yeah. Because that's his sovereign choice to do that. We are just commanded to preach the gospel, to preach the good news about Jesus. So we don't have to wait and do nothing. We can actively serve, actively love, actively worship, and do things for God's kingdom to build it. Right? And that's why we're here. That's why we're going to go through Mark, because Mark is a very action book. Like when you read it, if you read through and you kind of pay attention to the verbs, it's like they're going, they're going, they're going. They went, they're going, they're here. It's like, man, when did you sleep, Jesus? Just go, go, go. Now, here's the other thing, too, because if you may read that and say, as much as possible, you're like, sweet, that's a loophole. I put that in there because I know our focus may drift. Right? We have work, we have things, we have life to take care of. But again, our life can be guided more important, best by having God in our forefront in our sights. So this is not a do it all the time, because that's impossible. So I put that caveat on there because this is the grace. This is the grace that God gives us because he knows we're not going to focus on him all the time because we can't. Because we're humans. That's why we need Jesus Christ. Because he fills in the gaps with his blood. He makes us whole. He makes us holy. And so God forgives us when we can't focus on God, when we forget or when we drift. We can come back. That's all it was. The exile was like, look, you lost your focus. I'm bringing you back so you can get back into perspective of what's important. Right? And this is really what it means to Jesus, because it's a conscious effort, because we just do it daily, right? Pick up your cross daily and follow him. And die to yourself. All we need to work on is every day. Again, 1%. 1% better. And this comes back to that sacrificing section as well. We just put things aside that may draw our attention away. And so wrapping this up, right? The book of Malachi confronts us with a penetrating question that echoes from eternity, from ancient Israel in our lives today, right? How have you loved us, God? God, do you really love us? Yes, He keeps us alive. He keeps us going. He does all these things for us. Because God's people had grown distant. They grew comfortable in their half-hearted worship, that they didn't even recognize his love anymore. They forget why they're coming to church, why they worship God. And I think that's easy for us to do too. But God is pursuing each of us anyway. No matter our faults and follies, he is pursuing us. He has pursued us to get us to the point to accept his gift of Jesus Christ, his son. Right, he sends his prophets, he sends his messengers, and ultimately, as we see in the last day, or the day, he sends his son. He sent his son because we're on this side of history now. The same God who refused to divorce his unfaithful bride Israel is the God who refuses, listen, to give up on you. And so Malachi calls us to reciprocate God's faithfulness. But it's not out of obligation, it's out of love. To love him completely, to sacrifice meaningfully, and to wait patiently for his promises, because we know all those things are hard. But we know that's what we are called to do. And so Jesus cleared the way, and he was the unblemished sacrifice, right? And we know he's coming back. And so when you're reading stories, right, we all have a story. We all have the story that we're in, and we're in this story with God, and he has brought us into his bigger story. And so we are all here, and we're all part of that stream to further the gospel message so people will know who God is. And that's the most important thing we can do. That is in the end of the book, is that all of his people will be there and they will say, you are my God and we are your people. Right? And so we know how the story ends, and we know the elation and the joy and the peace that looks so nice in Revelation 21 and 22 there especially, right? We're by the river, we're by the tree, we're hanging out. God is the light. There is not even a need for a light anymore. And that should compel us, hopefully, to keep reading the story, to keep going, to keep asking, all right, God, what's next? Right? Because we can focus on him and focus on the story and what he's going to do, right? So, that is the end of the sermon.